The kitchen smelled of charred onions and old coffee. Light from a neon sign washed the bar in bruised blue, and the clink of glass against metal kept a steady, comforting rhythm. It was a Thursday night at Rosa's Taproom, a narrow room with sticky wooden stools and a door that shuddered with every truck that passed the corner. And Emma, 26, moved between tables with the practiced calm of someone who had learned to carry other people's weight while keeping her own face even. Her apron was frayed at the hem, the same torn apron she had worn for 2 years, hair pulled back, hands that knew the exact slide of a pint across a counter, and a smile that held too many late shifts. The regulars chewed the same jokes, Jamal played darts in the far shadow, Priya tapped her phone at the corner table, Carlos ran his thumbs along the bar rail like someone checking the grooves of memory. The door opened and rain stamped on the sidewalk. A man came in with the smell of motor oil and a leather jacket heavy with cold. He sat where he always sat, leaned over his drink, and after a while someone said something too loud and a laugh curved sharp. The man reached out and brushed Emma's side where the apron came loose, his fingers finding a fold, and for a moment a rip of movement exposed skin that told a story in colors no one wanted to name. A hush moved like a hand across the room. Emma covered the place with a palm, eyes claiming the ceiling, and the simplest thing happened with the weight of a verdict. Marcus, a trucker who usually kept his jaw set and his mouth to himself, stood up and walked over without swagger, only steps measured like a promise. That night, what began as a shift turned into a question that would not let the town sleep. The promise that formed then was elemental and small, a vow not of law, but of people looking after each other. And it started with hands, with a glass set down a little firmer, and with strangers deciding not to look away. If someone wanted to know what came next, they needed to see how a place learned to hold a life. In the days that followed, the rhythm of the taproom shifted like a tide. The morning smelled of stale beer and frying dough. The light came in dusty shafts, and conversations picked up the new edges of attention. Marcus sat with Emma in the kitchen behind the line while the stove hissed, and they spoke in the low voices of people moving around a wound. "You should not have to hide that," Marcus said, voice rough like gravel. "I know," Emma answered, fingers worrying the torn edge of her apron, the fabric catching under her nails. "It's been like this for years," she said, and Marcus, "Why didn't you say something?" he asked, softer. "Because saying it made it true," she replied, tasting the truth as if it were something bitter to chew. Jamal appeared then with a cup of coffee, smelling of tobacco and sugar. "I can cover a shift," he offered, eye steady. "I can watch the door," Priya said, voice quick as a bell. "I'll fix the back gate," Carlos added, thumping his palm on the counter. The dialogue did not stop at the kitchen door. At the bar, Rosa called, "No one touches the staff that way here." And Elena, who had stopped by with a bag of pastries, nodded and said, "If anyone makes trouble, they have to answer to all of us." That cluster of voices built a simple plan of support. The CTA to the audience asked gently for participation in the conversation. If you felt your chest squeeze now, you were not alone. And the video invited viewers to write in the comments a single line, "I saw," and one brief sentence about a time their neighborhood stepped in. It asked for small acts of witness and made clear that those comments could serve as a map for someone who needed proof that help could come in the shape of other people. The invitation was not a demand, it was companionship. It said your voice could make someone else believe they were not invisible, and then it moved back into the story as the taproom closed and people began to watch in pairs. The revelation came in a private moment that smelled of bleach and lemon, in the cramped back room where coats hung heavy and the radio muttered old songs. Marcus had insisted they sit, and the light was a thin line through the blinds. Emma unbuttoned her shirt a fraction, and the skin was a patchwork of stories. Pale lines like riverbeds, and darker blooms that still throbbed with memory. "How long?" Marcus asked, fingertips soft as a question, and the sound of the word filled the room. "Too long," she said, and the pain in the words sat between them. "Did you tell anyone?" Marcus leaned forward, colors of worry in his face. "No," she said. "I thought telling would make them take my job, my rent, the little I have." Marcus set his jaw and made a decision that did not need permission. Their conversation ran in careful circles. "We will not let that happen," he said. "What will you do if he comes back?" she asked. "We will be here," Marcus promised, and his voice held the kind of firmness that can be learned only when someone has decided to keep another person safe. Each sentence was accompanied by small gestures: a cup held, a hand placed briefly on a shoulder, the scratch of a chair. The kitchen fan whirred, the smell of coffee came and went, and when they stepped back into the room, the community had already started to move into the shape of protection. Protection became practice. People who had once been strangers organized shifts and routines that looked ordinary but changed everything. Rosa rearranged tables so there were no blind spots. Jamal fixed a loose bulb over the door so faces could be read. Priya started a group chat that was mostly jokes and sometimes urgent lines. Carlos volunteered to walk Emma to the bus stop. Elena signed up to be there on Friday nights. And Officer Daniels, a local beat cop who knew the alleyways and the names of everyone's dogs, sat down with Emma to explain options and to file paperwork if she wanted. The narrative showed each person with a concrete move. "I will bring soup," Paula from the bakery said, setting a stack of boxes on the counter. "I will drive her if she needs a ride," Tomas announced, slamming his palm against his thigh as if to punctuate a covenant. The reordered routines were sensory in themselves. The smell of soup in a pot, the scrape of shoes on the step, the warmth of an extra coat draped over a chair. Conversations multiplied and stayed open. "Do you feel safe enough to talk to a counselor?" Maria asked, leaning in. "Yes," Emma answered, slow like someone learning to breathe. "I can go with you," Priya said, and that promise became a new currency of safety. The torn apron continued to appear, always present, a small ragged emblem of the night that had started everything. And its threadbare edge reminded people why they would not let silence return. Tension rose a second time when the man who had caused the harm came back into the neighborhood, carrying the mood of a storm. He pushed open the door with rain still in his hair and a swagger he thought would unbalance the room. The bar filled with the sound of low murmurs and the clatter of chairs, a heavy quiet that tasted metallic. Marcus met him by the register. "You need to leave," Marcus said, voice steady. "This is not your place tonight," the man snapped. "She is overreacting," he lied, and the lie hung thin. The exchanges that followed were precise, a chain of voices that counted as defense. "No one here will stand for that," Rosa said and stepped forward. "Take your seat or take the road," Jamal added, fingers folded around a coaster. "You have no business here," Officer Daniels declared as he walked in from the doorway, shoes squeaking on the mat. The man tried to laugh his way out, thrusting a hand toward Emma, and that was the moment the room closed like a net. "Hands off," Carlos said, voice quiet but unyielding. "You do that again, and people will call what needs to be called," Elena said. The man faltered, as if seeing a different map of the town, one where every face was a witness. In the span of minutes, he became small, shrinking under the collective gaze, and finally, with a grunt and a thrown look, he left. The aftermath was not triumphant in the cinematic sense. It was raw and wet and small. Emma slumped into a chair and the room exhaled. The second moment of tension had been handled not by a single hero, but by a network, and the relief was both immediate and complicated. 1 month later, the town had shifted into modest action. Emma had a new counselor, Dr. Nguyen, who met her in the office above the bakery and wrote plans for rest and steps that were not rushed. The morning routine smelled of cinnamon rolls from Paula's shop, and Rosa had taped a small laminated card behind the bar with emergency numbers and the line, "If you need a place, we are here." Marcus organized a roster so that someone from the taproom would accompany Emma home a few nights a week. Officer Daniels helped file a restraining order, paperwork that felt official enough to be a scaffold for safety. Priya started a neighborhood walking group that left at dusk and looped through the streets so no one crossed alone. Jamal coordinated a modest fund to cover a security latch at Emma's apartment and to help with any immediate needs. The torn apron lived in a drawer for a while and then returned folded and cleaned, a talisman more than a tool. Emma went to 2 counseling sessions that month, and then a third, each time a small unpeeling of what had been stitched into her. She began to sleep with the window latched and found in the sound of feet at the door the odd comfort of not being alone. 3 months on, the small efforts had hardened into practices that a stranger would notice. Rosa's Taproom started hosting a monthly community hour where neighbors could learn about safety planning. Officer Daniels came with brochures and a calm way of talking about rights and procedures. And Dr. Nguyen arranged for a volunteer to come to the bar and give short talks about coping and resources. Carlos and Tomas opened a small maintenance collective that offered to fix doors and lighting for anyone who needed it. A local fund had paid for new locks on 3 doors in the block and for a small emergency phone that connected directly to the station. Emma had begun to work a midday shift again, a little at first, then longer, and each return shifted the geometry of her fear. She learned to say the word witness and to accept a hand across the shoulder without shrinking. She started a small notebook where she wrote down what she wanted to do that week, and slowly the pages filled with ordinary things. People who had only nodded at each other on the street now greeted with the obligation of care. The torn apron was mended by Paula and given back with a quiet ceremony, and when Emma tied it on the bar, hummed and felt like a place stitched back to its seams. 6 months later, the changes bore both small trophies and larger markers. The restraining order remained in place and had been enforced once when a call from Priya led to an officer arriving before trouble could start. A neighborhood association had formed, led by Rosa, with Jamal as treasurer and Priya as communications. And they published a short guide about looking after neighbors that they distributed at the bakeries and laundromats. They had raised enough to start a modest emergency fund and to sponsor a part-time advocate to help those who needed paperwork or rides. Emma had enrolled in a community course on hospitality management and was saving for a place that felt entirely her own. Marcus had helped establish a rota of volunteers who would walk people home from the bus stop. And Carlos organized workshops teaching people how to secure their doors and patch windows. Officer Daniels worked with the association to run monthly safety walks. And Dr. Nguyen had opened a small group counseling session that met weekly at Rosa's on Monday evenings. The torn apron hung above the sink like a flag, its raw edge a reminder of what had been and what had been rebuilt. More than one neighbor said that the town felt different, that the silence had been replaced by a new rule, unspoken but adhered to. We look after one another. Emma's recovery was uneven, sometimes fierce and sometimes fragile, but it was shared. The bar became a place where someone could be seen, and where help might be waiting in the shape of a soup bowl, a hand on a shoulder, a friend's steady footsteps. In the end, the story was not about punishment as much as it was about repair, and it spoke of the simple and stubborn truth that communities can heal when they choose to act. If this story moved you, leave a comment saying, "I saw," and one sentence about a time someone stood up in your neighborhood. Subscribe to hear more stories of ordinary people who became protectors, and to find out how small acts can change a life.